President Trump travels to the Middle East this week, where he will visit Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. He will not visit Israel. Now, the trip comes before a backdrop of the last living American hostage being held by Hamas released as a result of U.S.-Hamas negotiations. Now, also, last week, the U.S. apparently reached a deal with the Houthis to end attacks on U.S. shipping. Israel was not a part of that agreement. Now, some reports out of Israel are saying that there is concern over a growing divide between the Trump administration and Israel. Here to discuss this, Chris Mitchell, the Middle East Bureau Chief over at CBN News in Jerusalem. Chris, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks for staying up late for us.
Great to be with you again, Tony.
All right, let's talk about this. The president making his first foreign trip, going to the Middle East, but not stopping in Israel. Anything being said about that in Israel?
There is, and there's a concern that he may be visiting all of these other nations, but not stopping by here. It certainly is in the neighborhood, not that far away. So I think there's concern about what this trip represents and what it doesn't. And I think, as you mentioned, the one of the things that has done recently is that the U.S. Trump administration made an agreement with the Houthis to make sure that they stop hitting and attacking shipping in the Red Sea. However, there was no complementary agreement that Israel would be included in that agreement. The Houthis pledged to continue to strike against Israel. And since that agreement with the Trump administration, there's been several ballistic missiles that have been fired against Israel. I've heard the sirens here in Jerusalem myself. In addition, Tony, there's also the Iranian nuclear deal. And there's a sense that that's very concerning to Israel, that Israel's not part of that agreement as well. There's also the understanding that when President Trump goes to Saudi Arabia, there may be an agreement to allow Saudi Arabia to have civilian nuclear capabilities. And that, again, used to be tied to normalization with Israel. So there's a number of things that have happened recently that many people here in Israel are concerned that there's a growing daylight between the Trump administration and the government here in Israel.
So, Chris, this is not just legacy media that are running with these stories that love to show friction between allies, but this is actually occurring, and there's some concern. I want to just take, for instance, Iran. That has been at the top of the list of concerns for Israel, underneath getting back the hostages. And we've seen another round of conversations between the U.S. and Iran, and it's led to nothing. And it appears to me, and even some commentators here in the United States, I should say experts on Iran, are concerned that they may just be running out the clock. What is being said there in Israel?
Very much the same concern, that the Iranians are masters at negotiating, masters at prolonging the talks, all the while they continue to enrich uranium to near military grade and continue their nuclear program. That's exactly the concern that many people have here in Israel. At the very beginning of these negotiations, and they just had their fourth round in Oman, they were talking about enriching uranium. Well, here in Israel, they felt there's no point talking about enriching uranium. The point is you want to dismantle and destroy the Iranian nuclear infrastructure, period, just like they did in Libya back in 2003 and 4. So, yeah, the Iranian negotiations are deeply concerning here. And while the Iran and its master negotiators trying to run out the clock.
Now, to defend the administration, I think the focus of this Middle East trip is on economic development. It is the president's sweet spot. That's where he likes to be, cutting business deals. And in fact, there's been a lot of business deals with the Trump family in with Qatar, Saudi Arabia. So I think maybe wanting to keep those issues segmented, not getting it mixed in with foreign policy and war and such. But that said, Chris, you've been in Israel for nearly 25 years. You've been covering what's been happening in the Middle East. You've watched this. You have a long frame of reference, but you also have a biblical understanding. Why is it important that America gets its policy right when it comes to Israel?
Well, you go back to the Bible, and you want to go back to Joel chapter 3, for one, where God judges the nations for scattering his people and dividing his land. There is talk about the possibility that at least some of the players there in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, like Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, were going to be advocating for a Palestinian state. Well, that's dividing Israel's land right down the middle if they gave the so-called West Bank, Judea and Samaria to the Palestinian Authority. I'm not saying they will say that or even declare that. The White House actually denied that they would do anything like that.
That was a story. That was a story that came out of the Jerusalem Post. That's
right.
Ambassador Huckabee quickly knocked down. The White House denied, but it was out there. So that's not. You're not pulling something out of space. That was actually a story that was out there.
No, exactly. And so the concern is that there would be actors in the region, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and particularly Qatar, that would actually undermine what, from a biblical point of view, what Israel's all about. Qatar actually is the one that had been funding Hamas for years with hundreds of millions of dollars. They came out in support of Hamas immediately after October 7th. And Qatar, I think, is one of the nations, separate from Saudi Arabia and the UAE, that really concerns people over here because of their statements, what they say. They are Islamist, and yet they seem to be trying to woo the administration. It feels that way. I'll tell you, that's exactly how it's being seen over here, in addition to this $400 million jet that is going to be presented, perhaps. Right now, apparently it's under review by the Department of Defense, but that would be a gift. And people over here are thinking, well, what are the connections? Is there a quid pro quo somewhere? Is there a pledge for support? Is there a sense that maybe the U.S. would put more pressure on Israel to end the war and allow Hamas to survive? Those are some of the things that are happening here and being talked about here in Tony. And I would say, add this. I just got off the phone with ICEJ Vice President David Parsons. I know you've done the same. They called for people to pray.
Right.
This is such an important time to pray for President Trump, Ambassador Mike Huckabee, Steve Witkoff, all of the players right now, that they would have a biblical worldview, that they would not be enticed by anything, nefarious.
All right, Chris, we got to leave it there. We're out of time, but we will pray.